She stood at the altar, wearing one of the most expensive wedding gowns ever made. Diamonds glittered under the chandeliers. Fresh flowers filled the air. Europe's oldest aristocratic families sat quietly in their seats. And yet, the bride was crying. Not tears of joy, not tears of nervous excitement. These were tears of fear. Because on that day, Consuelo Vanderbilt, the richest heiress in America, was being married against her will. She would later say that she felt as if she were being led to an execution. This was supposed to be a fairy tale, an American fortune, a British duke, a marriage that united old titles with new money. But behind the velvet curtains and flashing cameras was something far darker. This was not a love story. It was a transaction. And by the end of this video, you'll understand how one dynastic marriage didn't just break a woman's heart, it erased her entire life. To understand how this happened, we have to begin with the name that made it inevitable: Vanderbilt. In late 19th century America, there was no family more powerful, more envied, or more feared. The Vanderbilts didn't just have money, they had unimaginable money. Railroads, shipping, industry, entire sections of the American economy ran through their hands. Their wealth helped build modern America, and with that wealth came a belief that everything and everyone could be controlled, including their children. Consuelo Vanderbilt was born into a world where money solved problems, silenced critics, and bent society to its will. But what money could not buy was freedom, especially not for a daughter. Her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, was one of the most formidable women of her era. Beautiful, ambitious, relentless. Alva did not see marriage as a matter of love or happiness. She saw it as strategy. In her mind, her daughter was not a child. She was an asset, a tool to be used in the ultimate social conquest. Because no matter how rich the Vanderbilts were, there was one thing they still lacked: a title. In the rigid world of European aristocracy, American money was considered vulgar, new, unrefined. But titles were eternal. And Alva Vanderbilt was determined that her daughter would secure one of the greatest titles of all. From the moment Consuelo could walk, her life was shaped toward a single purpose. She was trained, not raised. Her posture was corrected. Her speech was monitored. Her emotions were controlled. Affection was conditional. Approval was rare. Mistakes were punished, not with warmth or guidance, but with cold withdrawal and crushing disappointment. Consuelo learned very early that love was something to be earned, and that disobedience came at a terrible cost. While other children played, Consuelo studied etiquette. While others dreamed, she rehearsed obedience. Her mother demanded perfection, not because she loved her daughter, but because failure would reflect badly on the Vanderbilt name. And in Alva's world, reputation mattered more than happiness, more than comfort, more than consent. By the time Consuelo reached her teenage years, she was already deeply anxious, painfully shy, and desperate to please. She longed for something simple, a quiet life, affection, choice. But choice was the one thing she would never be allowed to have. Because far away, across the Atlantic, an ancient aristocratic family was running out of money. Their castles were crumbling. Their lands were expensive to maintain. Their title remained, but the fortune behind it was disappearing. And that made them vulnerable. In the coming years, two worlds would collide. American wealth, hungry for legitimacy. British nobility, desperate for survival. And at the center of it all would be a young woman who never asked to be part of either: Consuelo Vanderbilt, a girl born into unimaginable privilege and raised for sacrifice. And this was only the beginning. As Consuelo grew older, the world around her grew smaller. Her life was carefully curated: who she spoke to, where she went, what she read. Every interaction was filtered through her mother's expectations. Alva Vanderbilt believed that isolation created discipline, and discipline, in her mind, created greatness. Consuelo was rarely allowed to form friendships without approval. Letters were read. Conversations were monitored. Privacy simply did not exist. But even in a life controlled down to the smallest detail, something unexpected happened. Consuelo fell in love. His name was Winthrop Rutherford. He was kind, educated, and most importantly, he loved Consuelo for who she was, not for her fortune. For the first time in her life, Consuelo felt seen. With him, she laughed freely. She spoke without fear. She imagined a future that belonged to her. It was modest by Vanderbilt standards. No title, no grand strategy, just happiness. To Alva Vanderbilt, this was unacceptable. Winthrop Rutherford had no duke's coronet, no ancient lineage, no political value. In Alva's eyes, he was useless. The relationship was forbidden almost immediately. Consuelo was told she was being selfish, ungrateful, naive. Her mother reminded her of everything that had been sacrificed for her upbringing: the tutors, the gowns, the opportunities. Love, Alva insisted, was a childish fantasy. Marriage was duty, and duty did not ask for permission. Under relentless pressure, Consuelo was forced to end the relationship. The heartbreak was devastating. She fell ill. She withdrew. She sank deeper into anxiety and despair. But her pain was seen not as suffering. It was seen as resistance. And resistance, in the Vanderbilt household, had to be broken. That was when Alva introduced a solution. Across the ocean, in England, there was a man with one of the most prestigious titles in Europe, Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. His name carried centuries of history. His ancestors included warriors, politicians, and even a prime minister. But behind the grandeur was a harsh reality. The Duke was deeply in debt. Blenheim Palace, one of the grandest estates in Britain, was expensive beyond reason. Its upkeep drained what little remained of the family fortune. The title survived. The money did not. For the Duke, an American heiress was not a scandal. She was salvation. For Alva Vanderbilt, he was everything she had been waiting for. This marriage would do what money alone never could. It would transform the Vanderbilt name from wealthy outsiders into legitimate aristocracy. Negotiations began, quietly, efficiently, and without Consuelo's consent. There were meetings, letters exchanged, terms discussed. Consuelo was informed, not consulted. At first, she believed she could refuse. She begged, she cried, she argued. She reminded her mother of her love for another man. She pleaded for time. Alva responded with cold resolve. She accused Consuelo of destroying the family's future, of embarrassing her parents, of throwing away her destiny. The pressure intensified. Emotional manipulation turned into something far more cruel. Alva began to claim that she was ill, that the stress of Consuelo's refusal was killing her. Doctors were mentioned. Religious guilt was invoked. Consuelo was told that if her mother died, it would be her fault. And slowly, methodically, her resistance began to collapse. Trapped between duty and terror, Consuelo did what she had been trained to do since childhood. She obeyed. The engagement was announced to the world as a triumph. Newspapers celebrated the union of American wealth and British nobility. Society praised the brilliance of the match. No one asked the bride if she was happy. Because in this world, happiness was irrelevant. The date of the wedding was set. And as the preparations moved forward, Consuelo Vanderbilt understood something with devastating clarity. Her life, as she had imagined it, was over. What awaited her was not a partnership, but a role. A duchess in name, a prisoner in reality. And soon, the world would watch her walk toward an altar she never chose. As the wedding day approached, Consuelo felt herself disappearing. Each fitting, each social call, each congratulatory smile, they all pushed her further away from the person she once was. Her mother watched closely. There would be no hesitation, no public doubt, no escape. In private, Consuelo begged once more to be released from the engagement. She reminded her mother of her suffering, of her illness, of her fear. Alva's response was ruthless. She locked herself in her room. She refused food. She claimed she was dying. A priest was brought in. Consuelo was told that disobedience was not just a betrayal of family, it was a sin. If her mother died, her soul would be responsible. The message was clear: marry the Duke or live forever with the guilt of murder. By the time the wedding day arrived, Consuelo was emotionally broken. She no longer resisted. She simply endured. On November 6, 1895, the ceremony took place in New York City. The church was filled with flowers shipped from across the country. Diamonds shimmered under the lights. Society's elite gathered to witness what newspapers called the wedding of the century. The bride wore a gown worth a fortune, and she wept through the entire ceremony. Guests whispered, unsure whether her tears were nerves or emotion. Her mother knew better. As Consuelo walked down the aisle, she felt detached from her own body. Later, she would describe the experience as watching herself from a distance, as if it were happening to someone else. This was not joy. This was survival. When the vows were spoken, Consuelo did not feel married. She felt erased. At the altar stood a man she barely knew. Charles Spencer Churchill was polite, controlled, distant. He had not courted her for love. He had secured her for necessity. And in that moment, two strangers were bound together by obligation, not affection. The marriage was celebrated across 2 continents. American newspapers praised the triumph of new money. British society welcomed a desperately needed fortune. The bride's inner world remained invisible. That night, Consuelo became Duchess of Marlborough, and with that title came expectations, silence, obedience, endurance. Shortly after the wedding, Consuelo left America forever. The country of her birth disappeared behind her, along with the last traces of the life she had hoped for. Across the Atlantic awaited Blenheim Palace, a vast estate of cold stone, endless corridors, and crushing history. It was magnificent, and it was suffocating. From the very beginning, the marriage was empty. There was no tenderness, no intimacy, no emotional safety. The Duke expected heirs, a duchess, proper behavior, not a partner. Consuelo quickly learned that her purpose had not changed. She had merely been transferred from one authority to another. First, her mother, now her husband. Her isolation deepened. The language was foreign, the customs rigid, the expectations merciless. She was criticized for everything: her accent, her mannerisms, her very existence. Letters to her mother went unanswered. Affection was replaced with duty. Loneliness became her constant companion. In time, Consuelo gave birth to 2 sons, the heirs the Duke required. But motherhood did not bring closeness. It brought distance. The marriage remained cold, formal, and emotionally barren. And slowly, Consuelo began to understand the full cost of what had been taken from her: her youth, her choice, her sense of self. She was a duchess in public, but in private, she was a woman trapped inside a life that had been designed without her consent. And as the years passed, one truth became impossible to ignore. This marriage had not saved her family. It had destroyed her. Life at Blenheim Palace was governed by silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The palace was vast beyond imagination. Endless halls, cold stone walls, rooms that echoed even when empty. Consuelo was expected to fill them with dignity, but not with herself. Every movement was observed, every interaction measured. The Duke lived his life according to tradition and distance. Emotion was weakness, affection unnecessary. They shared meals in formality. They shared a roof, but not a life. Consuelo learned quickly that her role was ceremonial: appear when required, smile when observed, remain silent when uncomfortable. The loneliness was relentless. She had no friends she could trust, no one to confide in. Letters from America grew fewer. Her mother, the architect of her suffering, was now emotionally unreachable. The woman who had once controlled every moment of Consuelo's life had moved on. Her mission was complete, and Consuelo was left to survive the consequences. Over time, something began to change inside her. The fear that had defined her childhood slowly gave way to awareness. She began to see her marriage for what it truly was, not a failure on her part, but a system designed to benefit everyone except her. For the first time, Consuelo allowed herself to feel anger, not outwardly, not dangerously, but internally. She read, she learned, she began to understand the language of power and manipulation, and she saw how expertly she had been used. The Duke expected obedience. What he did not expect was a woman who began to think for herself. Consuelo started to find purpose beyond her marriage. She involved herself in charitable work, hospitals, housing reforms, social causes neglected by the aristocracy. For the first time, she was valued not for her dowry, but for her mind and compassion. These efforts brought her something unfamiliar: respect. But respect came at a price. The more independent Consuelo became, the more distant the marriage grew. The Duke took solace elsewhere. The separation between them was no longer subtle. It was complete. Publicly, they maintained appearances. Privately, they lived separate lives. By the early 1900s, the marriage was effectively over. But divorce was unthinkable. Scandal was dangerous, and Consuelo had already paid too high a price to be publicly disgraced. Instead, she endured. Years passed. The emotional toll accumulated. Consuelo suffered from depression, exhaustion, and a profound sense of loss. She had become a duchess. She had become a mother. But she had never been allowed to become herself. And then, quietly, the world began to change. The rigid social structures that had trapped her were starting to weaken. Whispers of separation emerged. What once seemed impossible began to feel inevitable. And for the first time since her wedding day, Consuelo allowed herself to imagine something radical: freedom. But freedom, she would soon learn, demanded one final payment. By the time the separation became official, there was no drama left in the marriage, only exhaustion. Consuelo and the Duke had lived apart emotionally for years. The announcement simply confirmed what everyone already knew. Still, the news shocked society. A duchess did not leave her husband, not quietly, not without consequence. But Consuelo was no longer the frightened girl who had walked down the aisle in tears. She had endured too much to remain silent. The separation was carefully managed. There would be no scandalous headlines, no public accusations, just distance. The Duke retained his title, the children remained heirs, and Consuelo was finally released from a life she had never chosen. But freedom came at a cost. Her reputation was fragile, her position uncertain, and the world that had once admired her title now watched her with suspicion. Worse still was the reckoning with her past. Consuelo returned to America changed, older, quieter, but no longer obedient. Her relationship with her mother was strained beyond repair. The woman who had orchestrated her marriage showed little remorse. In her mind, she had succeeded. She had secured a title. She had fulfilled her ambition. Consuelo, for the first time, refused to pretend. She confronted the truth of what had been done to her, and she named it: abuse. Years later, in her memoirs, Consuelo would write with devastating clarity about her childhood. She described emotional manipulation, fear disguised as duty, love withheld as punishment. The fairy tale, she revealed, had always been a lie. Time passed. The world moved on. But Consuelo did not waste the freedom she had fought so hard to obtain. She rebuilt her life, slowly, deliberately, not around status, but around meaning. She devoted herself fully to philanthropy, improving housing conditions, supporting healthcare, advocating for those with no voice. In helping others reclaim dignity, she reclaimed her own. Eventually, Consuelo remarried, this time not for strategy, not for power, but for love. Her second marriage was quiet, respectful, and deeply human. There were no palaces, no titles exchanged, only choice. And for Consuelo Vanderbilt, that made all the difference. But even in happiness, the past remained. Some wounds do not disappear. They become part of who we are. Consuelo lived long enough to see the world change. Women gained rights. Marriage slowly shifted from transaction to partnership. But she never forgot what it had cost her. Her youth, her voice, her first chance at happiness. She was born into unimaginable wealth. She was forced into unimaginable sacrifice. And in the end, her story became something far more powerful than a cautionary tale. It became a warning about what happens when family ambition outweighs human dignity. Consuelo Vanderbilt's story is often told as a footnote in history. A wealthy American girl, a British duke, a glamorous marriage. But that version of events misses the truth entirely, because this was never a story about romance. It was a story about power, about a world where women were currency, where daughters were traded for status, where obedience was mistaken for virtue. Consuelo did everything she was told to do. She was dutiful, she was respectful, she was silent. And still, she paid the highest possible price. Her marriage did not fail because she was weak. It failed because it was never meant to succeed. It was designed to serve a system, not a human being. For decades, dynastic marriages like hers were celebrated as triumphs, but behind the titles and palaces were lives quietly unraveling. Consuelo survived. Many did not. What makes her story endure is not the wealth or the scandal or even the title. It is the clarity she reached at the end of her life. She understood that love cannot exist where fear is used as control. That consent extracted through guilt is not consent at all. That no amount of luxury can compensate for a stolen voice. Consuelo Vanderbilt was born into one of the richest families in history. Yet the thing she fought hardest to obtain was something money could never buy: the right to choose. And perhaps that is why her story still matters, because even today, in different forms, the same pressures exist. Expectations disguised as duty, control disguised as care, sacrifice demanded in the name of family, tradition, or success. Consuelo's life reminds us that breaking free is never easy, but it is always necessary. She lived long enough to tell the truth, and by telling it, she reclaimed what had been taken from her. Her story is not about what she lost. It is about what she refused to lose forever: herself. If this story stayed with you, if it made you uncomfortable, reflective, or angry, then it has done its job. And if you want more true stories where history's beauty hides very real cruelty, where power is questioned, and where silenced voices are finally heard, subscribe. Because behind every grand legacy, there is always a human cost, and those are the stories worth telling.